Nothing he does is without purpose in his overall political approach.
That I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we received was wrong.
All the water in the world will not be able to wash the crime of Tony Blair, what he committed against the Iraqi people.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of The Monarchy on Press TV. We are proud to give you another look at Britain with this programme. It's the stuff that you won't normally find on mainstream media networks.
The United States and our allies have prevailed.
While George W. Bush is apparently proud of everything he's ever done, Tony Blair came dangerously close to facing reality when he accepted an exclusive interview on CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS, talking about the Iraq War and its consequences.
Tony Blair, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You faced huge opposition within Britain to your decision to participate and support the invasion of Iraq. What kept you so firm in your conviction that it was the right decision?
I had a very clear view after 9/11 that we should be with America in confronting the threat of terrorism. The issue of terrorists getting hold of WMD was, for me, the major next dimension of this entire struggle, and I felt it important that the US didn't face this alone, that we were with them.
And of course, for that, you were occasionally derided as Bush's poodle. How did that make you feel?
Look, in politics, particularly when you're dealing with these types of decisions, you get used to a certain amount of abuse, so it didn't make a great deal of difference to me if people criticized me. What was important was that all the way through, however, we were obviously heavily involved with the development of policy, and we were also building the alliance with the US that allowed us to confront what we thought then, and I think there's a case for staying still now, is the biggest danger of this type of terrorism, which is that you get a coming together of people who are prepared to cause mass deaths with those people who are prepared to use weapons of mass destruction, whether nuclear, chemical or biological.
Given, however, that Saddam Hussein did not prove to have weapons of mass destruction, was the decision to enter Iraq and topple his regime a mistake?
You know, whenever I'm asked this, I can say that I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we received was wrong, because even though he had used chemical weapons extensively against his own people, against others, the program in the form that we thought it was did not exist in the way that we thought. So I can apologize for that. I can also apologize, by the way, for some of the mistakes in planning, and certainly our mistake in our understanding of what would happen once you removed the regime.
Blair was referring to the claim that Saddam's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction, which was used by the US and British governments to justify launching the invasion.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons, that Saddam has continued to produce them, that he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population, and that he is actively trying to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
He spoke to Zakaria, a personal friend, only in order to issue a partial apology for specific aspects of his role in the Iraq conflict. An apology that was swiftly dismissed by his critics as a pre-emptive move in response to the UK government's inquiry led by Sir John Chilcot into the 2003 Iraq War.
Blair doesn't volunteer such interviews without facing some pressure. Immediately he faces pressure from two sources. Firstly, the recent publication of the memo between Colin Powell and George Bush, which showed that in April 2002, Blair was already committed to supporting American military action in Iraq. And secondly, we are expecting the publication in the not too distant future of the Chilcot report, which is a report conducted by the British Parliament into the reasons for going to war with Iraq. Now, Tony Blair will have seen those elements of the report which refer to his role. Therefore, he knows that there is going to be a new public debate on his role. So the interview with CNN was under considerable pressure, and it was typically Blair insofar as that he appeared to say that he was critical of his contribution, when in fact he actually ends up justifying his own contribution.
Just days before his interview, the unearthing of two classified US government memos published in the UK tabloid The Mail on Sunday left no doubt that the former British Prime Minister committed Britain to following the US into Iraq a full year before the bombs started dropping on Baghdad in March 2003. The first of the memos concerned was sent to US President George W. Bush by his Secretary of State Colin Powell in early April of 2002. In it, Powell writes, "On Iraq, Blair will be with us should military operations be necessary. He is convinced on 2 points. The threat is real, and success against Saddam will yield more regional success." The second memorandum prepared by the US Embassy in London for Colin Powell gives insight into the determination of Blair and his allies to overcome political obstacles and opposition within his own parliamentary Labour Party over Britain's potential participation in a US military coalition vis-à-vis Iraq. 1 week prior to a planned meeting at Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas, Powell states that Blair will present to Bush the strategic, tactical and public affairs lines that he believes will strengthen global support for our common cause in Iraq. Blair will be with us should military operations be necessary. Blair knows he may have to pay a political price for supporting us on Iraq and wants to minimize it. Nonetheless, he will stick with us on the big issues.
People dress up the interview as an apology, but if you look at it very carefully, you'll see that at no point does he take responsibility for serious mistakes. So that exactly, he says, "I apologize for the fact that the intelligence was wrong." Well, that's not his mistake, it's being provided with bad advice. But when you look deeper into it, we know that Blair's government placed very strong pressure upon the intelligence services to provide proof for the cause for war, given the fact that he'd already decided upon the necessity of the war. And so you had the tragedy later of David Kelly in the intelligence services committing apparently suicide as a result of that pressure. So he apologizes for other people's mistakes and avoids explaining his own contribution to that particular mistake. Then he goes on to say, well, there were mistakes in the planning. He says, I apologize for mistakes in the planning. He doesn't say what those mistakes were. And when you consider it, well, planning an invasion, I would imagine it's inevitable that you're going to do some things incorrectly. So it's completely abstract. We have no idea what he's apologising for, and so he's not apologising for anything. But he continues with saying, and we were wrong in our estimate of what would happen after the invasion and the occupation. Okay, so we is the problem, not I, Tony Blair. We made mistakes, which he's generously apologising for. Now, who made those mistakes in the invasion and occupation? Well, it was primarily led by the United States government, and it was United States policy which dominated. Nobody seriously believes that Blair had major influence on the policy as far as the invasion and occupation goes. He gave political cover, but he didn't provide the strategy or the direction. So everything that happened with the occupation, for instance, the destruction of the Iraqi army, the dispersal of the effective state apparatus, complete loss of Iraqi sovereignty, and the social misery and chaos that followed, all of those were essentially a product of American policy. So then that Blair is inferring, we see that Blair is actually apologising for the mistakes of the United States administration. And those are the nearest he gets to direct apologies in the whole interview.
Chilcot report's going to come out sometime. I hope it comes out soon. I think there are some decisions that Tony Blair has got to confess or tell us what actually happened. What happened in Crawford, Texas in 2002 in his private meetings with George Bush? Why has the Chilcot report still not come out? Because apparently there's still debate about the release of information on one side or the other of the Atlantic. And at that point, Tony Blair and the others that have made the decisions are then going to have to deal with the consequences of it.